Hello and welcome to Roguecast, the official podcast of Rogues Gallery and Round Rock, where we talk about games, comics, and other stuff on our pop cultural radar. I'm Randy.
I am Nick.
And this is Dave.
And this time out, we are going to start with a TV show that we've all been watching on HBO. Actually, I guess it's not TV. It's HBO.
Yeah.
Right.
It's an HBO show we've all been watching, where contractually you have to say that.
Yes.
And that would be The Newsroom, the latest from Aaron Sorkin, who you might know from The West Wing and Sports Night and Studio 60 on Sunset Strip, or the movies Social Network and The American President.
And A Few Good Men.
And A Few Good Men.
You can't handle the truth.
I can't.
Did you order the code red?
I did order the code red.
You're all darn right I did.
But his latest is a look behind the scenes at what was a Keith Olbermann-esque anchor, a CNN-type network, called Atlantis Cable News, and it actually takes place a bit in the past. It's like 3 or 4 years in the past, so that he can talk about news stories that have happened, but he sort of knows how they all play out.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is. It's
So if he brings up like some when they kill Bin Laden.
Yeah. Spoilers.
Oh, sorry.
They kill Bin Laden.
Right.
Yes.
We'll edit that out. He knows how that played out, how it hit the news channels, what the controversies were, and that means that the show can then act as if it's just happening, even though by setting it in the past.
Yeah.
And he's going to know what to do with
Nick,
it.
you want to give us a quick rundown of what The Newsroom is, like main character and what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, it basically centers on a character Jeff Daniels plays, which is their Keith Olbermann analog, and I'm blanking on his actual name.
Will is his first name.
Will McAvoy.
Will
McAvoy. And sort of his show, and it's... he's in love with his audience.
And a little bit with himself.
With himself.
And, although you say Keith Olbermann, but he kind of has that personality, but his politics come from the other side.
He's more of a Joe Scarborough type, actually.
Right.
And it's sort of... it comes to a head because he went on this kind of tirade at a... not a news conference. It was sort of a...
He's speaking at a college, and a sorority girl asked him... This is the first episode. This is not really spoiled. It's in the first episode. It's the first 5 minutes. And the sorority girl says, "Can you tell us why America is the greatest country in the world?" And he sort of goes off on a tear about what's wrong with America.
Yeah,
right. All the other guests kind of give these pat answers that our freedoms are, it's kind of pat stuff. And then he busts out with, "We're not the best country."
Which, the owners of this network freak out, and sort of his viewership
But
freaks out.
Viral.
It goes viral, and he goes on vacation for a little while, and when he comes back, he finds out that his staff has left, and his, the person... was managing...
His editor. His producer.
Managing producer has been replaced with actually his old ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, who is also a producer and a former combat journalist who's been around the world.
Her name is Mackenzie. Mackenzie McHale, if I'm not mistaken.
Mackenzie McHale. Aaron Sorkin, much like Stanley, loves his alliteration.
Yes.
Right.
And she's played by Emily Mortimer.
And she's fantastic.
Yes. And, from there you get a kind of round robin of different characters,
They sort of have to rebuild...
It's Newsnight 2.0 is what they call it.
They sort of have to rebuild the show from the ground up with new staff, and
they're shooting for a level of idealism in journalism that they never have before, where they're not really as beholden as really real stations are to their corporate masters.
In a way, it's basically the news is a courtroom, sort of, and you can kind of focus on it as...
Yeah, and Will is a former lawyer, and that sort of fits in. But it's not like what Sorkin did with The West Wing and with Sports Night. This is the idealized version of what ESPN would be like. This is the idealized version of what politics should be like.
Right. And his idealized version, and he gets a little preachy. We love Sorkin.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
But we know he gets a bit preachy.
Sure.
But to be fair, he does show that it is not easy to pull off this a newscast that tries to be idealistic. They hit all kinds of pitfalls with it.
Not everything is roses.
Including his corporate masters get pissed at him.
Yeah, very pissed.
And that's it's interesting to see how that snowballs in the first season.
There's also Sorkin does love the sort of 40s screwball comedy, romantic comedy. So there's a lot of relationship stuff, romantic triangles, which I feel is sort of the weakest element of the show. But I understand, it sometimes works really well.
He also does the banter that one might associate with a lot of those 40 movies, and that's always been a Sorkin trait.
Sorkin's dialogue is definitely one of his strengths.
I get lost in his dialogue. I think it's amazing.
Oh, it's really good. And here's one of the surprises. Olivia Munn, who's been sort of a geek girl, she was on Attack of the Show and G4 TV and all that kind of stuff. And on The Daily Show.
She's very attractive.
She's very attractive, but I've never found her terrifically talented. I've always been kind of disappointed to see her on things. And she's perfect for Sorkin, it turns out. She actually is... She reads his dialogue better than almost anyone else. And
she plays like a financial analyst who's kind of got some, I guess, social issues with interacting with people.
Yeah, she's socially awkward.
Yeah, she's
but
cut
she's
off
like
from
super
people.
smart.
Right.
Yeah, and
like
she's
a smart
one of my
ice queen.
favorite. She's one of my favorite characters, and I would never have thought that about Olivia Munn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, none of these characters are very one note. They all get fleshed out over the course of the season. And
who's the guy who plays his immediate sort of like the guy who's the go-between between the corporate guys and him?
Is it Sam Waterston, right?
Yeah, Sam Waterston.
Playing sort of the constantly drunk Charlie, his executive producer.
Maybe my favorite character on the show.
He gets all the good lines, and he gets to snap at people and yell at people and tell them what to do.
Yep.
And
yeah, he's both like kind of a charming drunk and a fun guy to watch be angry.
Yeah.
He's just really good on the show. Like every time I see him walk into a scene, I think, oh, this is going to be a good scene.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think it's a good cast. I have my problems with it. It's taken some serious critical drubbing. Like the critics really don't like this show. But I sort of readjusted my expectations after both Dave and Nick really liked it, and have been really enjoying the second season, which just started on HBO.
And I haven't seen that. Nick picked up the Blu-rays and kindly gave me the DVDs that came with it, so I've only seen the first season.
Yeah, I have only seen the season.
Interestingly, maybe I was thinking about this, maybe because I have seen really actually not as much Sorkin as one might think. I'd say I'm a fan, but I only saw many bits and pieces of West Wing, and I never saw Sports Night and some of his other stuff. I've seen some of his movies.
So the ticks haven't gotten old.
So the ticks haven't kind of gotten old for me yet. And I would say, especially like if you have never watched Sorkin, give it a shot.
Yeah.
If you like Sorkin, know that you're going to see some of his patterns in it, probably a few that you might annoy you, but he's also I think a lot of the qualities that you've come to expect from him.
And his politics may piss you off because he's not shy about them.
Nope.
No.
In fact, it's part of the point of the show.
Right.
But it's available. It's actually 10 episodes.
Yep, 10 episodes.
It's a real quick watch.
Right. That's good for people like me who I 22 episode seasons scare me, and I don't like to watch that long of anything.
And I will also say the special features are really good. There's a behind the scenes on every single episode, but there's also on a vast majority of them there's commentaries. And the commentaries are really interesting to hear sort of behind the scenes, how they filmed it. Aaron Sorkin talking about different things. Well, also Sam Waterston talks, and, Jeff Daniels. And you get all this very interesting backplay.
And I suppose, just broadly, you also get to see some just newsroom procedural stuff that that I found interesting.
Yeah.
So if you've ever seen, news movies like All the President's Men or Broadcast News.
Right.
This I feel like is very influenced by Broadcast News.
I was going to say, Broadcast News
which is a really good movie.
It's fantastic.
Then it's just interesting to see some of that behind the scenes stuff, even if they're not being 100% realistic.
Yeah.
It's informed by realism.
Yep.
Not as informed by realism as our next topic, a game called Dungeon World. Which I want to start
completely realistic.
No,
I want to say
on.
off the bat, Dungeon World is not available in our store right now. It's actually not available in any stores right now unless they happen to order a billion copies because it's been in a print for a little while. There's a new printing coming soon. We've all played it, and I think highly recommend it.
Yep.
Dave, you were the one who sort of introduced us to this, so run us down through Dungeon World.
Right, so Dungeon World is like the indie game answer to Dungeons & Dragons. In a lot of ways, it has elements on the surface that will remind you of D&D First Edition.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I've never played. Random fact.
Yeah, but it's got those classes.
But it's got the classes, and it is meant to create, though, a more cinematic version of sort of D&D, where, and also a more improvisational one, where not everything is meant to be set out by the DM in advance. You're not supposed to have an in-depth storyline. You want to have some broad plot points and things, but the characters are really meant to drive the story, and they want the DM to even be surprised by things that'll happen. And so, in the first session, you all build characters, which goes very quickly. And then you ask the players if they're playing like a halfling or something like that, and they say, "Oh, I was an exile from my village" or whatever. Then you ask them a little bit about the DM is supposed to ask them about the village and where they came from and what halflings are like, and that becomes the template for halflings in this world. You will begin to fold that information into your stories.
Right.
And the other interesting thing, the thing that makes it an indie game, is that the actual mechanics are more indie oriented.
Well. Also, character building, you build relationships between all your characters.
That's true.
I thought that was one of my favorite elements of building characters.
Right, so you're going to have ties, so the way you get experience in the game, instead of just by defeating monsters, there's several different ways you get it. One is actually by failing rolls.
Yep.
Yeah.
With the sort of, if you think of the philosophy of, you learn more by failing than you do by just accomplishing something.
Yeah. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Correct. Thank you, Nietzsche. And one of the other things you can do is, like, say you decide early on you owe a debt to somebody. You have to come up with a few key links between your characters. Maybe you owe a debt to somebody. Maybe they owe you a favor. Maybe you're trying to convince them, because you're a druid, that the wilderness is greater than civilization.
And they give you ideas based on the character type. There's like 4 or 5 ideas. You don't have to go with them, but if you're like one of these people who, if that too much choice is intimidating, they give you suggestions. You're like, oh, well, these are possibilities if you're a rogue or a thief, as they're called.
And basically, at the end of a session, what you'll do is you'll look, and if you fulfilled these, like, oh, I owed him for saving my life, and now I've saved his, you check that off, and you get, like, 3 experience points or whatever, and then you can level up your character and stuff. So it has a lot of the fun of D&D. You kind of pick and choose your powers and your weapons and stuff, but it goes much faster. I would say it's much less micromanaged, and it's much more about the jumping into the gameplay. And
to use a gamer term, it's probably about half the crunch of D&D, and a lot more storytelling element.
Right, I would say, it's informed by games like Fiasco, if you've played that, and other indie games, where, like, for instance, if the player sort of fumbles a roll, the DM doesn't just, like, have a monster attack him or whatever. The DM might change the scenario, like, say, you might have him fall through a hole in the floor, or bring in reinforcements.
Right. Or you hit the monster, but you only succeed in making it angry. Or you hit the monster, but somehow you drive into a blood rage, or something like that.
It's a very engaging game system, and it does great with the unexpected.
Right.
Because...
it's meant to give the players difficult choices, but also sort of high moments of big heroic action.
Yeah. I will say, if you've ever played any RPG game, D&D, whatever, there are times when you as a player you check out. You're doing something other thing. With Dungeon World, you can't really check out.
No, you're engaged the whole time.
You're engaged the entire time.
The whole group is there the whole time. And I thought that was really
neat.
And
I think that was one of the best mechanics.
I guess I would. Yeah, that's an excellent point, because I think all GMs have experienced the thing where they put so much energy into running their game, and they look around, and sometimes their players might be on their phones or their iPads or whatever, and checked out a little bit.
Yeah.
And here, because it's so rules light, you really don't have to know much to jump into it. You're going to kind of have their attention the whole time if you're doing it right.
But it's also, in how the action occurs. I mean, the heroes, there's no set order of, how you go. It's whoever wants to go first.
Right.
And it allows just sort of this give and play.
The DM drives it by putting them into dangerous scenarios, and you figure out how to get out of it. But it doesn't have. There's just so many fewer mechanics, and all the mechanics that do exist in it are built to sort of create these cinematic highs and lows.
Yeah.
In our game, we fought like a giant dragon, but I to fight it, I dragged in a giant turtle.
Right. They were in an underwater temple in the second session, and you had to swim around outside, and a dragon turtle chased after you.
Because there was a hole in the wall. I had to go after.
Right. And you angered the dragon turtle and lured it in to fight the ghost dragon. And just lots of crazy stuff like that happened that I could never have planned as a DM.
No.
That was a lot of fun.
Expect the unexpected if you play Dungeon World.
Mm-hmm.
Well, moving on to comics, I want to talk about a series that I've been reading that I think Dave started reading before I did. It's the Marvel's Oz series that Eric Shanower is writing. Scotty Young, who you probably know from all those baby X-Men covers and all that kind of thing.
And I guess we should say this is the Wizard of Oz, not the HBO prison drama Oz.
That'd be a very different series. And probably not as all ages.
No, not at all.
This is an all ages series. It's available right now in 5 hardcovers, or you can go the other way. They've actually got soft covers, digest size, that are good for kids.
Right. Well, a quick bit of background. Frank Baum, the guy who wrote The Wizard of Oz, most people may not know, but he actually wrote 14 Oz books.
Yeah.
There was The Wizard of Oz, and then 13 sequels.
Yeah.
And I grew up reading those, and I enjoyed all of them. And, they all have those same qualities of Wizard of Oz, but they made it a fun place to explore. And
Eric Shanower is a guy who's been a fan of the Oz books. Like, he knows he's on all the fan groups. He's a professional writer and a cartoonist. But he knows this world like inside and out.
And he did some amazing Oz graphic novels in, I guess, the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, which have been reprinted by IDW.
Which I highly recommend all of them, really.
Yeah, I think where the current volumes are called Little Adventures in Oz. They're in our kids section. He's doing a story about the Greek, the Odyssey, which is called Age of Bronze, which has been on hold for a little while, but
it's his big epic project.
Yeah,
when he's done with it, it's going to retell the entire story of the Trojan War. I guess it's the Iliad, not the Odyssey.
It is the Iliad. You're right.
And And he's been doing this through Image for years and years now, like 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Anyway, you get like 3 issues a year, 4 issues
something
a year,
like that.
somewhere
Pretty
in that
regular.
ballpark.
Well, the moneymaker is clearly, and this is not a huge moneymaker, but the Oz for Marvel is more
so he writes
viable.
and Scotty Young draws.
He writes and Scotty Young draws, and it's got great, beautiful art.
Yep.
And each book is an 8-issue miniseries that is collected. And it's an Oz book, so they've done 5 of them so far, and hopefully they'll do all of them.
Yep.
They keep doing them. There's another one coming soon.
And you'll meet all these new characters in Oz that you've never met before, unless you saw Return to Oz, which you either liked or found terrifying.
Yeah, and that has elements of other books. It's like it's just one book, like several elements.
Right, they mashed up 2 books for that.
It's very weird, because I saw that one and The Wizard of Oz, and I loved that one compared to Wizard.
Did not like Wizard of Oz.
Not really.
But I mean, even if you're not a fan of the movies going back or the books going back, it's just a really interesting world, and you'll start to see, there's actually a lot to this. It's like it's a magic. It's a lot of magic. He was trying to create a story for kids that would basically be, I forget what the exact quote is.
Well, he said something like that doesn't have the darker elements, basically the scary stuff from the old, grim fairy tales,
Right.
The dark ending to the original Little Mermaid and all that stuff. He wanted to create something that was happy and modern and American, honestly.
Yeah.
It's the first great American fairy tale.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of fantasy elements. I mean, Oz is a fairy kingdom, so any animal that goes there can start talking.
Yep.
And they introduce a hen, and they introduce a cat, and there's a bunch of stuff.
One of the things that I always thought was neat was that Oz felt like a real place.
Yeah.
Whenever Dorothy or other people get to go there, ultimately.
Yeah, because Dorothy isn't in it until the 3rd or 4th book she comes back.
Yeah. But like whenever people go there, they have to find other ways to get there. There's different ways to get there.
I love that when Dorothy first goes back, it's the Great Quake of San Francisco that sends her back.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she plunges into the earth.
It's the middle of the earth. Yeah.
Yeah. But the wizard ends up returning, and he's kind of this fun, scallywag, but kind of like a clever guy too.
Yeah.
And you see all these other lands, including the lands outside of Oz, outside the big deserts that surround it.
Yeah.
And it's a fun world to explore. And Scotty Young has, I would say, kind of a somewhat Bill Watterson-esque cartoony style.
I can see that.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Well, his taken the Cowardly Lion is just a great, fun, big design, and his designs for the Tin Woodsman, and there's a lot of really great design stuff going on, and you realize just how much depth there is to this world and how many big, cool things there are in it.
I don't know who's doing the coloring, but the coloring's really nice. It sort of has a painterly look to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of that really suits his bright kind of but slightly sketchy style. The same way when you would see those Bill Watterson Sunday Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit like that.
Yeah, but if you have kids who like, say, the Narnia books and Dark Crystal, and Dark Crystal's even darker than this, but fantasy world type stuff, it's really good. It's really appropriate for all ages. My kids don't read this. I do. I love it.
Yeah.
They may read it eventually, but I'm the one who's reading it. I think it's just a fantastic read.
Yeah, definitely. I think recommended from all of us.
Yep.
And finally, to close us out here, we're going to talk about a recent movie which only Dave has seen.
Right. Ha 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 ha.
So, Dave, take it away.
This is my payback for you. What did we do? There was a
Smash
game.
Up.
Yeah, you talked about a game.
Talked about Smash Up.
So, I'm a bit of a horror movie fan. I went and saw The Conjuring, and it's directed by, I'm going to forget the guy's name, but it's like James Wan or something like that, who I know directed back in the day Saw and the movie Insidious just a few years ago. The new movie is The Conjuring, and it purports to be based on a true story. It's at least somebody did write about these stories in the 60s, and I happen to doubt the reality behind them, but it's sort of imagine a pair of sort of paranormal investigators in the 60s who get called out to look into this creepy lakeside house that a family, husband and wife, and their 5 daughters have just moved into. Scary things happen, as one might guess. I don't think I knew most. I forget who plays the wife in it. She's somewhat notable, and the dude who played Night Owl in Watchmen and plays one of the parapsychologist type people.
Okay.
Everybody wears ugly 60s, or it's maybe 1970. 70s clothes. But the period piece stuff is really just kind of window dressing. Nothing is there that feels super period piece because they're isolated at a lake.
Don Draper doesn't show up.
Don Draper does not show up. They don't have martinis every.
Wouldn't it be cool if he did that?
Anyway, this is a pretty scary movie. I liked it. I liked it a fair amount. It was maybe like Insidious before it, kind of a mixed bag for me. Now, Insidious was interesting in that it seemed to be somewhat of an homage to Poltergeist. And you know how in the first half of Poltergeist, it's kind of this eerie build-up?
Yeah.
But in the second half, they're like going through portals, and there's like creatures in their house and stuff like that, and it becomes more overt.
Yeah.
So I thought Poltergeist did really a great job with that. One of my favorite all-time horror movies. Insidious, that first half is amazing. Like, I think it's a great, terrifying movie. The second half, when they got to that overt stuff, I found like was not scary at all. Like, and what do you call it? The Conjuring is more of a much more even. They had no part where I like checked out or anything. But it did have some bits of weak acting and some parts that I didn't think were scary. And a few of those horror cliches where I'm like, oh, the people are just stupid here. You know, one thing that bugs me is when what were you about to say, Nick?
You do say that there were some things that annoyed you, but you were also telling me some really good scenes as well that actually did kind of...
So I will briefly say one of those good scenes. Without this doesn't give away too much, but there's a scene where one of the daughters wakes up in the middle of the night. Some creepy stuff has happened before, but nothing overt. She's sleeping in the bedroom with her sister is on another twin bed, and she sits up, and she's probably like 10 or so, and she's just staring intently at the door to the hallway, which is open, and everything is shadowy, and you really can't see anything, but she is just transfixed, and she clearly sees something. And she looks under her bed at first, and you're like expecting a scare there, and it doesn't really happen, but when she looks behind that door, she just freezes up, and she calls to her sister and wakes her up. And she's like, look at the doors, behind the door. And she's like, it's looking right at us. And her sister looks at it. And her sister is like, I don't see anything. I don't know what are you looking at? And she's like, don't you see it? And it's just really just terrifying as you're like, one of them can clearly see it, one of them can't. And you're straining to see it, and it's just darkness, and you really can't see.
Yeah.
And then her sister gets up to go over, and she's like, there's nothing there. And she goes over to see what it is. And I will not tell you what happens.
But bad things, probably.
But it was a very scary scene. And it's not quite what you expect. There was a lot of things that weren't what I expected. Occasionally I was a little disappointed that it was sort of what I expected. Like, one of the slight disappointments was there's a certain point when they're like, oh, I did some research and I found out this is why there was a noose around the tree. It was because somebody was hanged there in 1865 or whatever. And, that sound we heard, well, that was probably this. And I was like, it was too many answers too quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm always disappointed to learn answers too quickly in horror movies like that. But overall, a pretty scary movie that I would recommend. There's a side story to it about a haunted doll that kind of intersects with the main story a little bit. And, like, that part was just, like, some of the scariest stuff in it. And this doll is just horrifying looking.
Haunted dolls and scary clowns.
Oh my god! Yeah. Like, the first shot of the movie is like on half seeing this doll's face, and the camera just slowly pulls back, and it's pretty chilling. So I would give it a general recommendation. It wasn't fantastic, but this director is clearly, I think, one to watch. Maybe this is more even than Insidious was, and so maybe his next movie is going to be even better.
But if you're in the mood for a horror movie, it's one to watch.
Mm-hmm. I would say so.
All right, well, that about wraps it for us this week. Thanks for listening, and as always,
Yo, Joe.